So we're all here to explore what it looks like to reposition for a new executive role. Glad you guys have come. Before we jump in, well, I'm Justin McCullough. I'm the CEO of Onyx Unlocks and co-founder of Executive Pivots with Brandy Shade, whom you guys all know. And I think probably the easiest way to describe it is 30-year history. Have been fortunate and blessed enough to be able to enroll roles where I've been able to produce $3 billion in economic impact. I've had 4 corporate jobs or Fortune 500 jobs in senior leadership, and have been in some smart startups all the way to some mid-sized companies. So I've kind of seen a little flavor of everything, several kind of C-suite roles. And this is one of my great passions, is how do we bring things to market, whether it's our organizations, our people, or our personal brands. And so a lot of this has to do with my own personal experience, having gone through a transition myself, as well as some of the plays in our playbook and some of the best practices. So that's what we're going to talk about today. First off, the numbers are changing and they flex around. Some people say 6 to 18 months. Some people are saying, now it's pushing more like 2 years. But in general, we have a pretty significant challenge when it comes to a transition, taking anywhere from 9 to 18 months. That's what we hear a lot, somewhere in that time frame. It's obviously a very expensive problem when you talk about your total comp and what it looks like to go without your compensation. And so we kind of quantify that as lost income. Some of us have a little bit of buffer and we're able to manage that. Some of us are maybe doing consulting and some other things in the interim, but it is an expensive problem that we want to solve. It's almost always not about your experience or capability, and it is 1000% around a positioning issue. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we try to shorten this gap based on positioning. We have a program that we'll talk more about at the end of this webinar where we can help you. But basically the quick preview of it is, in general, we help pull things into alignment within an 8-week program. It's completely focused on executives and senior leaders. So these are SVPs, VPs, C-suite. And we have a proprietary process that's proven, and it is completely done with you. And so our goal ultimately is to be really personalized and hyper-focused on results, which means you get landed sooner. We have an assessment some of you guys have already taken. Others have a thing here at the end where you can see how to take this assessment. But because we help leaders like you exclusively, we see a lot of data around this. And I mentioned that we have 8 dimensions that we typically look at in our program, and you can see them listed here on the left, and they're in reverse rank order, right? So the least performing to kind of best results based on the self-assessment scoring that executives like you are putting in. So the quick read on this is what we call network ready, which is like going to your network, is around 47%. We see this go all the way down into the 20s. And so this is one of the things that is the biggest hot button, is how do I activate my network? Being offer ready, right? This is obviously as we turn the corner in the interview and we're ready for an offer. What does it look like to actually be offer ready? And then interview ready speaks for itself, but differentiation ready and brand ready are kind of tightly coupled. So today, what we're going to be talking about is basically asset ready, brand ready, differentiation ready, and network ready. So one red and a couple of yellows. And this is, again, the results of what people self-score. So they're not our data, they're your data, right? People just like you coming in here saying what they think is going well. A lot of times what we see is we have 4 big buckets that we talk about in our program. One of them is around direction and one of them is around presence. And so I'm just curious here, when you look at these 8 options, are any of these resonating for you guys? Maybe drop me a note in chat if any of these are sticking out and sound familiar, because we just hear this all the time in our calls. One of the big things is, how do we make this competitive switch, right? I can't seem to get transitioned out of my industry. A lot of feedback on what does it look like to cross over lanes and get into a new category. A lot of times what we hear is that because of experience levels, right? They're like, hey, I have all this experience, but people don't seem to understand me. And that's causing a lot of obviously heartburn, because it's like, hey, I can't just tell people I'm a unicorn. That doesn't work, right? Then there's, from a presence standpoint, a lot of times it's around, why am I not getting interviews? Why is it I'm not getting offers? I don't understand. My network doesn't seem to be strong enough. I didn't think it'd be this challenging. In fact, that's probably the thing that we hear the most, is realizing it's challenging and reconciling the fact that, man, I did not know it would be as hard as it actually is. And we'll talk a little bit about why that difficulty occurs. The good news is it's solvable, but it's really not solvable in the way that you might think it is, which is why we've really put a lot of energy and effort into this. So the two categories here, I'll just kind of toggle back: direction and presence. You'll see here direction ready and presence ready, yellow and black here in this particular chart. We have a whole playbook here, and I'll share this towards the end. It'll make more sense by the end, but for now, I don't want to overwhelm you. But every one of these arrows is a significant sort of milestone in our program. And the reason I just want to surface this for you is the job search itself for an executive is very different than what we call like a job seeker. We're really looking at having people reorient around their focus as an executive in transition around a playbook, not a specific set of tactics. And so these are the four major moves. You got to be direction ready, you got to be position ready, you got to be presence ready, and conversion ready. So we're going to talk more about why we're here today for positioning. And we're going to step through a couple of the key problems that we're seeing. And I'd say probably the first half of this webinar is really just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing and thinking about the same thing. So there's some repetition, not necessarily that it's duplicative, but tight shots on the target, if you will. So one of the big things is, why is my resume not working? Because there's a lot of focus on the resume. And we believe ultimately that the resume itself should do all the communicating, right? Because we know that we're listing our history. We have all had great achievements in our roles. And so usually that results in, all I gotta do is brush up this resume, send it out. People are gonna, be drawn to this. It's gonna make a lot of sense. But the truth of it is, because that's the belief, it really costs a lot of time, because it's a misdiagnosis of what will actually drive success. And so that's really what we want to kind of step through here, is to not put so much emphasis on the resume itself. And then ultimately what winds up happening is, because that resume emphasis is occurring, we miss the fact that now it's really a commodity. The resume itself at the executive level, it's not doing the work. It's not doing the job that you think it is. So it turns into really high effort with a very low response, and it doesn't produce fruit, right? It's not really where you get traction. So what we find is a meaningful area. Yes, we do have to do some resume work. We have to get some communication clear as it relates to our job history. But in reality, it's all about the resume being a part of a positioning process. And that's something that happens before it gets to the resume, right? So we don't create positioning with the resume. We create positioning somewhere else, and our resume reflects that positioning. One of the big things here is to think of yourself as a product, as a marketable good or a service that people want, who are in urgent need and desperately looking for the right talent. And because of that, they're in a buying mindset, and confused buyers don't hire, right? And so that's the big thing we want to address here, is if we confuse them, we will lose them. And so we really want to think about, do we show up well in that position kind of way? So ultimately, the way we're going to get to that is we're going to fix our positioning through clarity, and that's going to come before the resume. Another thing around this is emphasis on the network. We all know that the vast majority of success, both when we've run our companies and when we've hired others, we look to who's in our network or who knows somebody that we know, because that know, like, and trust factor is so important. And so a lot of times when we're now on the flip side of that, we're looking at our network and we're suddenly thinking, wow, I used to think I had such a strong network, but now I'm really questioning, is my network able to produce the opportunities I had in mind? And so this is sort of a discovery process that happens in reverse, because in most cases, we feel like we have a strong network until we see a role reversal. And so what's really happening, though, is your network, your peers, your colleagues, they obviously respect you, right? It doesn't have anything to do with that. They really want to see you succeed. And a lot of times what we find ourselves saying is, hey, like, all I got to do is show up, I'm respected, and that's going to be good enough, because once I start producing some visibility and reconnecting, everything's going to start working out. That's kind of the thought process here. And because of that, we start doing a lot of meetups and chats and things like that to, quote unquote, stimulate the network. But that also takes a lot of time, and that delays our results, because what happens in those conversations is, oh yeah, this is great, let me know how I can help, right? That's like kiss of death, is let's talk again in a few weeks. Right? I don't know if you guys are experiencing any of these, but I think I want to pause for a quick breath here. Are any of these resonating with you guys when you do your meetups and and reconnect. What's a fourth one that I'm missing that you guys are experiencing a lot right now? Keep an ear out. I hear a lot of like, hey, I know you sent me your resume. Can you send it again? Which is always a good vote of confidence. I'll wait for a second for any fast typers to drop something in chat. Oh, unsolicited advice. Yeah, for sure. That's right. Or the fun favorite to add on to the unsolicited advice is, while you're here, can I pick your brain because I know you're so sharp, you can help me with my problem. And then you wind up giving 45 minutes of expert advice to somebody. When you ask for an introduction, they don't have to remind them. Yeah. If you find a role where I can help, let me know. I'm happy to help, right? Yeah. Yeah. Great. So the reality is, when we're in that act of creating goodwill and collaboration and reconnection, the truth of it, though, is goodwill alone doesn't really give us the direction to produce the introductions that we need. And so the real insight here is your network, while it wants to help you, it can only advocate for things that they can clearly understand and describe, right? So your network is also confused. So just like a hiring manager or a potential executive who would bring you onto the team, they can't be confused. So again, we come back to the positioning challenges. How do we make this really crisp and clear so that we position well and our network understands it? So then the last part, as we get closer to what feels like traction and success is, man, I'm getting like people like me. There's some cool things going on. I'm in a hot category, or I have a lot to offer on my resume. But man, when I make it through the offer stage, there's just a gap here. It's not quite feeling like it should. It doesn't quite fit the way it should fit. And while this is really like making me feel like I'm going to get somewhere, in reality, this just isn't really what I want to do. And so I'm not sure if this is the right role. Maybe it's not the right company. Maybe the timing is off. And so the challenge here around this is like, it's almost like confidence signals that tell you everything's going to be fine. It's just going to be the next conversation you get into because you're getting a lot of these kinds of hits. But the truth of it is, it's kind of like a false signal, or worse, it'll drive you down a path of maybe lowering your expectations, lowering your compensation, lowering to a smaller role because you're like, well, this is what I'm getting hits on. So I guess, I'm going to shift from, being an operator at the C-suite level in this category to, I'm going to be a VP in this category. And, if I'm lucky, I'll get, 70% of my normal salary, right? Something like that. So we don't want to have to equivocate around all that. So it's a big deal. One of the things that we find around this, again, as it relates to positioning, is without a better signal, a person says, well, this person has done X at this location and produce these kind of results. I bet they could probably fit in my situation. And that's really the positive signal that feels good, that somebody can see your Swiss Army knife capabilities to plug in. But that's also where the more you dig into it and the more you're being positioned for the role and you get to the offer, you're like, now I really understand what they're looking for. And if we would have started this conversation with me knowing this in advance, I probably wouldn't have had this conversation. So that's a big part of the reality around how do we get to the right roles where we have a lot of conviction on them and we want to see us lean into them. And in this case, the real problem is the people we're talking to that see us, they're maximizing or magnifying our components on our resume or our history that meet their needs and goals, and they're minimizing everything else, right? So there was a time in my life where I was in a primary marketing role in the C-suite, and my longer history was in product. I've just been a product guy forever, and I was trying to more clearly express being a chief product officer, and it took me a while to realize my resume was written in a way where they just kept seeing marketing, not product. And in my mind, I just knew 1,000% I was having a product conversation, but everybody was lifting the marketing words off the page. And they were like, Justin's going to be great for our marketing needs, right? So these kinds of things, like especially in our adjacent industries or, where talent is overlapping, we got to make these things really clear because they will take things and run with it, and not necessarily to our benefit. So all this basically comes down to, it's not a resume problem. It's really not a network problem, and it's not an opportunity problem. What we really have are clarity problems. Okay, so I'm just going to take a spot check here at chat. I see a couple things going on. Maybe some, okay, some people dropping connections here. So how do we think about this? For quick sort of definition, because words matter, I want you to think about positioning, clarity, and alignment in these ways. Number one, the market needs to understand exactly what you do and the problem that you're solving. And if you can't make that real clear, they're going to make you smaller in their mind than you actually are, right? So positioning, when we don't do it well, it'll be smaller than what we know we are. Smaller means we're not going to get our value. Smaller means it's not the right role, all those things. When we talk about clarity, we're really talking about being able to clearly express the leadership identity that we have and what that means to a recruiter, and in a way that other people can advocate our identity for us because we're so clear in our communication. And then the alignment is completely oriented to the capabilities we have and the value we create and what it is that we're actually trying to pursue. So one of the big things as we get from a corporate role or a senior leadership role, and we start to move away, as we lose a lot of leverage that we've been familiar with, comfortable with, and used to having, right? Because we used to be positioned well to be able to get the things we needed done. But when we're on the other side and we've left the organization, now we have a totally different concern. We don't have the leverage we thought we had. So a lot of our sense of authority and being seen as an authority has gone away. And if we haven't maintained visibility and practical engagements, whether they are in social media or conferences or other things, then that's an even worse challenge because there's no visibility, right? And so in addition to that, we lose a lot of that sort of gravitas where it's like being clearly seen as the person who makes decisions, makes things happen. And then ultimately your identity has to go back to who you are in your clear communication of your identity rather than the halo effect of what the organization gives you. So real quick, as a personal anecdote, I used to be a senior leader at CBRE, and this is one of my more recent roles. And CBRE obviously is a Fortune 500 company, and I was on the property tech side of the business. And this was a pretty good progression of a series of prop tech companies I worked for. And as a result, some of the big names out there, Honeywell and Johnson Controls and Siemens and things like that, they knew who I was. I was in conversations on LinkedIn and phone calls and all this other kind of stuff because I was a mover and a shaker. But as soon as I left that environment, it all of a sudden became like really unclear where all these people that I was used to engaging with were asking questions like, well, what is it exactly you do? Like, I mean, yeah, it was so good talking to you at CBRE, but like, what are you doing now? And there was this like weird feeling of, wait a minute, we fostered this partnership, this relationship for a long period of time. I'm surprised that these are the kinds of questions that I'm being asked, right? And this is a part of like, we have to recognize the truth of our situation. And one of the things that we talk a lot about, Brandy and Trevor and myself, is like, the power of a team, right? We're so used to being able to make great things happen with a team. And now all of a sudden we start to feel alone, that we don't have the team that we need. And so this is a big part of the transition. It's like, man, who are my advocates? Who is my team? How do I get back to this place of being able to make things happen? And so ultimately we have this kind of expectation gap between my resume, my experience, and great opportunities will come out of my great network, turn into, gosh, I've been at this for a while. And it turns out leadership transitions like this take a lot of time, and this is really a disturbing gap. And because of Google and now AI and all these different things that we can do and outplacement services, the information buckets that we tap into, they all talk about the job seeker market, right? So everything you're going to do on like searching, if you're just trying to self-serve in a DIY way, you're going to find 9 times out of 10 practical advice for a job seeker. And a job seeker is somebody that's, at a much lower level than you. And so we can't really play by those conventional playbooks, and we can't do the things that normal job seekers do. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is we need to understand sort of where and how these executive roles get placed. And there's really 3 major places this occurs. And for the most part, executives tend to just because they're not in the job. Their normal job isn't getting a job, right? Like, so as a result, getting into this zone of how do I tap in and succeed in this transition, they don't usually recognize that there's 3 different places that they need to be in. Their relationship market is a huge part of this. This is where 70% of the roles get filled before they're ever even disclosed, right? So this is part of the hidden market. And we've got to be able to position ourselves in a way where we can tap into that hidden market. There's the more traditional path of executive search firms, right? And as we know, when we've hired through our own recruiters, right, and they've been a conduit for us, those recruiters are trying to be laser targeted. And we hire and fire our recruiters when we're executives based on their ability to match what it is we're trying to accomplish. And what do we do when we're talking to a recruiter? We tell them, don't you know, this is our next 12 to 14 months for the organization. We're going to accomplish this and this, and I need this role to do this, and I need a guy or a girl who does this, and we're looking for these outcomes. So when the recruiter's engaged internally, it's hyper specific. It's not a shotgun blast, it's a laser beam. Well, we show up a lot of times looking like something even worse than what a shotgun blast would be, because we're all over the place. We're trying to produce this broad target. And so this is a real big gap when we're talking about how we appeal to recruiters. And then lastly, when we're in the visible job market, that means we're looking at things on LinkedIn. We're trying to actually see, where do we put applications in, where other job postings, this is where the masses are. Not that you can't find something here in group number 3, but this is really not the ideal place to be. And frankly, this is where a lot of people think that they're going to get their transition, is just in number 3 alone. All right, so search is stalled because we're waiting for recruiters to reach out to us, right? Kind of what we were just talking about. A lot of times we're trapped in this cycle of resume rewrites and cover letters, and something that feels closer to applying in mass rather than being targeted. A lot of our messaging is all over the place with where we show up online with friends and with our colleagues in our networking. So it's really unclear. We're often really hoping the market can just see in us what our value is and what we bring to the table. And then we're diligent, right? We're executives, so we know we need to put the pedal to the metal. We need to get work done. So no doubt you're going to do some job searches. You're going to do some postings. You're going to book some calls. You're going to put the effort in there. But that's not necessarily the best way to go about it, because when we're doing things like a traditional job search and we have not yet thought about it through the lens of positioning ourselves and marketing from a marketing context, we are missing the reality of how the executive hiring process actually works. And it's way more around market positioning. So what does that mean? We need to define really what makes us unique, and our leadership position has to come first, right? So this is a core identity concern, and how do we define what is true in our leadership? We have to then bring that together around the relationship market, and we need to be strategic on how we activate it. That's peers, colleagues, and that gets more sophisticated in our program. We go into details around boards and organizations that we can influence and affect, where our ideal people are based on our leadership identity. And then we need to create demand, and that demand always comes through clarity. So what we mean here is the opposite of confusion, right? So clarity creates demand, confusion repels people. That's what we mean here. And then we want to be specific and clear to our network so that we can become the obvious choice to a specific organization. And this idea of shrinking to be more specific feels counterproductive. But if you're trying to play broad, you're going to be broad, and that means you're going to become invisible. So if you feel invisible today, it might be because you are broad and you need to get way more specific to specific organizations. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we want to do is clarify the positioning, get our leadership narrative together, get our alignment together specifically as we go to market, so that we can get our patterns sort of to all sync up. And then we want to activate. So, all right, well, we love a good strategy, right? So let's get into that. So some of the things that we want to do is step through these 5 gaps and then turn it into some action steps. So if you're the kind of person who has a notepad and you want to write things down, or you have maybe a text pad open and you're taking notes, we're probably going to turn the corner on some things that you might want to, specifically look at. A lot of times what happens is 2 or 3 of these gaps are occurring at the same time. And so without sort of giving them a name, it might feel like sort of one problem, but usually it's across these 5. So let me just step through them pretty quickly here. I'm seeing that we got about 30 minutes left. I only have 250 slides to go through today. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Ta-da-da. All right, sorry.
Actually, he's not kidding. He's just
It's 220. 220 slides.
Okay, let's go.
Yep. All right. So positioning confusion, right? Confusion. So I want you to think about you, but I also want you to think about your consumer. Your consumer is the hiring manager. Your consumer is a former colleague. Your consumer is somebody that's the managing director of the fund, right? That's who your consumer is. So when we talk about positioning, we're talking about how do we show up positioning ourselves to someone else. So if we say, for example, senior operations executive with 20 years across multiple industries, that's probably factual, and your resume probably speaks to all that. And what happens in that kind of a conversation is they kind of nod their head and they go, yep, okay, cool, I'll let you know. Rather than if we start to get into a stronger position, turnaround leader for multi-location service organizations, I compress a 3-year recovery timeline to 18 months, and I did it in this place, and this place, and this place, and here's some accolades around that. Now it's way more clear about where you fit in somebody's story, because you're not trying to describe yourself in a generic way. You're trying to actually show where you show up. So positioning is really one of the things that we want to suss out first. And this is an example of weak versus strong. Okay. Another part of this is our value translation. And we have in our first couple of modules in our program, as we work them with you, we have a whole lot of emphasis on how do we verbalize and articulate the value we create. This is about value creation. So this is the writer downer here, is how do we show up and describe the value creation, the impact we make. So not so much all the things we were responsible for, but more around the things that they value. Because again, the CEO of the company has said and made a promise to the board, we're going to grow X% this year. We're going to create this profit. Our EBITDA is going to do this. Our, expansion is going to look like this in this territory, right? So they have very specific things they're looking at. So you're connecting yourself to those very impactful things they're already looking for. That's what we're trying to do here. Then we need to get really, really crisp on aligning to the market, threading the needle, right? So beads of a bracelet, right? We need to thread through multiple beads of a bracelet to make it make sense. This is not one thing, this is multiple things, right? So, when we're talking about changing titles, for example, we can change titles and still draw on the same exact experiences if we articulate them well. It won't be a title issue, right? So a seasoned COO fielding inbound for VP level roles at a company, their challenge really was, being seen as overqualified until he got in front of the right people. And the right people for this particular person was PE-backed growth companies, where that sort of precision turnaround focus, somebody who was on fire for that kind of work, which stresses a lot of other people out. Now all of a sudden you've got a match with the buyer who has a specific problem that they know they have around turnarounds and the intensity of it, right? Because when PE is involved, they're looking for very specific results and they're not playing around with it, because that's why they made the decisions they made. And so they're looking for the kind of operator who can do that. Well, this is the kind of thing that is really a matter of sussing things out and describing specifically what you do, rather than saying, oh, I also did turnaround initiatives. I also did, high impact expansion initiatives, right? So we get clear when we know who it is that we're going to market for. This is something I see a lot, and I think you guys probably experience this as well, is just being incongruent in how we show up, right? So the resume has some very specific things in it that we talk about, and maybe we've gotten coached a few different ways on the resume. Maybe we even had a resume writer get involved and help us, and a consultant. So our resume says things, and we got the algorithm considered and all these other things for the ATS. But then our LinkedIn says a little bit different, right? Our LinkedIn is trying to be more about us, and it's got a different kind of message, and we're thinking about it a little differently than the resume. And then when we show up in a conversation, it's like every single person we talk to, we start over and we have a totally different expression of who we are with every single person, right? So I want you to think about this as a ransom note. You do not want to send a ransom note. That ransom note cannot be a scattered message in multiple ways in multiple places. We need to look very, quote unquote, on brand, right? So this is about getting really crisp and tight to where everywhere they see this reinforcement of who and what you are. And we can do that. That's the good news, is we can do that once we understand that's a real challenge that we need to solve for. So then lastly, we talked a little bit about this sort of strategy vacuum of kind of treating it like a typical job search, and broadly scooting across multiple opportunities without a strategy, right? Instead, we really need to get clear, hunker down on what is best that we can convert on. And what that really translates to, and this is something we talk a lot in the program about, is I know you've got 30 years experience, but let's just talk about what is the highest impact area and get really clear on that. And a lot of times what we find is it takes that dialogue to really go, oh yeah, this is actually a through line. This thing I've done, it could be called 10 different things, but in reality, it's this one thing. And I just do this one thing really, really well. And then we go, bingo. Okay. So let's latch onto that. And instead of calling it 10 different things, let's get really clear on how we want to describe it one way, right? And then get really consistent around it. That's an example of how we dial that in. And then we align that. Remember, beads on a bracelet. We got to thread the needle through those beads. Then we start to align that message to a clear problem, to a clear market, to a clear buyer, right? And that buyer is the CEO, or that buyer is the board, or that buyer is the hiring manager. Okay. So now how do we put it into action? And so there's 5 phases that I want to talk through here. As a quick time check, I think we're doing okay. So we've got 5 phases we're going to walk through, and just so you're aware, I'm going to have a couple of little templated sections. And so, you might maybe want to take a screen grab or something. But on a couple of these, I'm going to pause and ask you to take some action, and then give me some feedback in the chat here. So there's your heads up warning there. Okay. So phase 1, let's get into it. So there's a few different things that we look at in our program, but let's just get really clear on the starting point. How can you say a fill in the blank Mad Lib style, I help this type of organization solve this very specific problem by my unique approach that results in this very tangible, specific, measurable outcome? How can we get that crisp and clear so that we can communicate in this sort of predictable, reliable, repeatable way? An example, I help PE-backed industrial companies solve operational fragmentation post-acquisition by building integrated operating systems, resulting in margin improvement 15 to 25% within 18 months. So if you're talking about a category that values a particular kind of metric, for example, if you live and die by EBITDA, then you better have EBITDA somewhere in this statement, right? If you're the kind of organization or role that has to do with churn or retention, you want to make sure that that's the hero thing. I was talking to this one guy who spent 45 minutes telling his story. And at the very end, I said, so basically you're the internal advocate for the customer. And he's like, yeah, I guess that's probably true. And as we talked for 5 minutes around it, he realized his entire through line was as the internal champion, voice of the customer, and always trying to bring the most valuable value to the customer. And just by seeing that's sort of what his focus was, his entire narrative changed, and he was able to hero up this idea of what does it mean to be a customer advocate to produce measurable outcomes. And that completely changed the way he operated in the market. Okay. Well, this surfaces the challenge, right? So, 90 seconds to fill this out, probably not enough time, but I think it maybe gets us oriented to the value of this and what we need to do to make this a really useful template to get us moving in the right direction. Oh, thank you, Doris. Let's see what you got here. CPG, retail merchandising, marketing leader. I build customers for life for $1 million brands. I bring merchandising, marketing, and data together to simplify complexity, speed up execution, and create value propositions customers trust. Doris, my recommendation is if you could dollarize something in there as your measurable outcome, so that can have some of that horsepower. And if you've been across multiple organizations, you might say something like, one of my previous pitches is when I got to this part is resulting in rapid growth in a short period of time. In one company, they were at 2 million. I got them to 5 million in 22 months. Another company was at 5 million, got them to 100 million in 4 years. another Fortune 500 I worked for, we went from 0 revenue to 500 million in revenue in 9 months, right? So like you can just sort of like comma list them out at the end if you want to. Okay. All right, moving on to phase 2, positioning. Okay, so this is really just, are you easy to understand, right? Because if you confuse, you lose. And we want to make sure that people are tracking on what it is that we do. So I want you to ask yourself, would a recruiter who doesn't know you read that positioning statement from before and know exactly where to place you? So Doris, thank you for offering yours up. I see Bruce has put his in there as well. Are we moving in a place where a recruiter could read what Doris said and go, yep, I know where this matters. So when I when I got freed up for new opportunity when I was at Capital One, we had a program and an overarching sort of reorg, and a lot of people got severed, and I was one of them. And so I called up one of my friendly executive recruiters, and as sometimes guys do, called him by his last name, and he's like, McCullough, how you doing, man? What's going on? I hadn't heard from you in a while. And so I gave him the quick story. He says, cool, what are you doing now? And I talked for about 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Didn't think about it. I just started talking. Anyway, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't really have time for this call, but if you want to talk sometime, maybe get with my receptionist and or tell me right now the one bucket you're in and the one word I need to remember. That's how we ended the call. Was he forced me to give him a bucket, and I said, Chief Product Officer, and how do you want me to remember this call? Like how do you want me to remember this? And I didn't have an answer. I did not get a call back, and I couldn't get with the secretary. And so my hottest opportunity, the guy who actually answered the phone, I wasn't ready for. And this guy was a really competent, good executive recruiter. So I missed it. And I chased him down in a couple different ways, and I was like, all right, missed it. So that's why that matters. Okay, so would a CEO also be able to read this and immediately understand the problem that you solve for their organization? Remember, the CEO is creating value. They're trying to drive results. They're overcoming obstacles. They're looking to have great team members. They're doing all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, they're mission driven. They're trying to hit some numbers. They're trying to make things happen. So would that person who's running a specific kind of filter be able to see where you'd be able to impact the organization? And then would your own network, those people that you know, like, and trust, and who you hope know, like, and trust you, peer friends, colleagues, et cetera, influencers, be able to read it and know exactly who to introduce you to?
And Justin, while they're doing that, Sapna had a question here for you of how can I avoid sounding too generic in the problem and unique approach?
Great question. So we sound generic because we haven't specified the real person who has the real problem that we're going to be working on. So for example, I was just having this conversation yesterday. If we are talking to financial institutions and we're making a pivot into industrial or manufacturing, this is the example I was dealing with yesterday. The person I was talking to will like, it's the same stuff I do in financial that I would do in manufacturing. So that's their perspective. That's what she kept saying. And I was like, yeah, but manufacturing is trying to deal with lead times. They're trying to deal with lag times. They're trying to deal with capacity issues and surplus issues. They're using all kinds of other terms, procurement issues. Financial institutions don't have those issues. So yes, you're doing a certain kind of work at a high level that you feel like is a strong pattern match. But if you're not describing their specific problem with their specific vocabulary, then it's not going to be a match because they are looking to do something very tangible. So an example coming out of my own background is talking about financial results in technology companies and being able to say, like, I can take a technology company, do a transformation initiative and produce 2x, 3x your current revenue and give those examples versus being able to say organizations who have been traditionally software oriented, who are now trying to have proprietary hardware. I help those organizations integrate software and proprietary hardware to create a total turnkey solution. Well, now we get closer to a statement that makes more sense because the problem is hardware. Now, if I'm taking that one step further, this is my prop tech example, take that one step further to, I help enterprise companies dealing with prop tech for large portfolio A-class buildings who have a challenge integrating a local hardware solution with a cloud integrated cloud security solution. And I help them do that at a global scale, right? So we get closer to the words that are meaningful to them, that they care about. Whereas in my mind, it's all the same stuff. I'm going to help you go to market. I'm going to help you double revenue. I'm going to help you launch a product. I'm going to help you build something, whatever. So I hope that helps. How do we go from generic to specific? It's really, you got to know who you're talking to. Okay. Thank you for that. No, yes, still needs work, 65%. Okay, so let's go on to the next one here. So phase 3, connect your experience into one story, one clear story. Okay, so here's the template. My career has been defined by this particular pattern of success. Organizations I serve best are this type of organization facing this very specific kind of challenge where what you uniquely deliver. Okay, so we have another Mad Libs style question or template to help us kind of bring the right things to the surface. So an example of this is, my career has been defined by building high performance commercial teams in fragmented markets. And this can be improved by which markets, for example. The organizations I serve best are mid-market SaaS companies facing go-to-market scaling challenges where I install the talent, systems, and revenue architecture that doubles ARR in 24 months. So everything I just said in that previous example gets sharper when I say IoT or smart buildings or e-commerce or whatever, as what kind of SaaS company. And it gets sharper whenever I say install the engineering talent or I install the sales talent, right? So the more we can do to add these specific elements, the better it becomes. One of the key things with both of these templates I've shared is we want to pass the 60-second test. Most of that buying decision is being made in that first 60 seconds when you're trying to communicate these details. Who are you? What do you do? Why do I care? That all happens in 60 seconds. If you just have the previous statement, Mad Lib statement, and this statement, you're so much further in that conversation because in the first 60 seconds, they have a way to put you in a bucket that makes sense to them. They know sort of what you mean and the results you drive, and they're starting to put you in their story. Right? You want to tell your story, but ultimately the buyer wants you in their story. Right? So that's what we're doing here. So let's move on to phase 4, targeting. So I'm gonna, before I jump into the details of this slide, Brandy and the coaches have a wonderful, I'm just thrilled by the way this particular part of our program works, called the sweet spot. And I find, to me, this is just my perspective, that the activity on the sweet spot is one of the biggest unlocks in our program because it really moves multiple factors together to create alignment. So those beads on the bracelet that you're threading through, the sweet spot is exactly that. Like, how do we find the sweet spot that puts these multiple variables together? So this is a kind of a lightweight version of thinking about what we call the sweet spot in our deeper program. But basically, we got to get really clear on the company size, because there's a big difference between a F100, right, versus a growing, scaling 50 million trying to get to 100 million kind of company. So we want to get the company size right. We want to get clear on the industry that we want to focus in on, their growth stage, and obviously there can be all kinds of different growth stages, and we can hit the same button on growth stage around like the major problem they're having if they're in a turnaround phase or something like that. And so then here on the right, we just kind of outline the simplicity of how you start moving in that direction. Get your targeting right. This helps you understand what are you going to look for, how are you going to activate around, and now you start to put together some of the pieces that other people who you're going to talk to need to hear. They need to know that you've already done the thinking to filter this way, because most people can't handle a wide open suggestion. So this helps them picture answers that they already have. They already know somebody in this industry. They already know somebody in this growth stage. They already know somebody in this company size. Okay. All right. Now, how do we get this activated? So here's my positioning identity. I help this type of organization solve this specific problem. I'm looking for conversations with this type of a decision maker at this type of a company. If you know anyone who fits, I welcome an introduction. This is so much clearer to the friend, the recruiter, the whoever, right? So my conversation at the beginning of this call talking about the recruiter, I call it coming out of Capital One. If I could have just told him this at the very top of the call, I'd have been done in the first 60 seconds. And I'm confident he would have been emailing me back with knowing 10 people because I would have given him enough detail to work on, right? So this is really simple stuff, I guess. But on the other hand, it is marketing stuff, it's positioning stuff, it's branding stuff. It's how do you look like what they're buying, not what you're selling. And this is really the key distinction here is you need to show up well, looking like what they want to see, not what you want to say. And that's so hard to get across when we're executives and we want to tell our story and we know that we're a unicorn or a Swiss Army knife and we can do all these great things. But we've got to. We've got to. So one really important thing is a lot of times we will take this kind of a power statement here and we'll just take half of it. We'll just be like, you know, I'm a people focused team leader and I like to lead organizations that are, you know, Fortune 500s to create maximum returns. What a throwaway line, right? But it sounds good. It feels right. But it doesn't help people understand because it's really not clear enough. All right. So in the program, we go deeper with this idea of executive assets. So the question becomes, where does statements like this across these phases, where do they start to show up? And this is a really important concept around executive assets. So there's touch points in LinkedIn, there's touch points in your resume. You might have a business card for yourself, or you might have you must have an email signature. You must have a bio, right? There's all these other assets that help you tell your story consistently. And so the question then becomes, where do all these things surface? And so that's another really important part of the when we're working with folks in our program is to get all these things mapped out clearly so that they can consistently surface in the right altitude. So this is what we say when we're in front of a buyer. This is what we say in front of a recruiter. This is what we say when we're in front of our peer or our network. This is what we say when we're trying to position ourselves for an organization or a board seat, right? So we get all those things really clear so we're consistent, congruent across all these different places. Okay. So I'll just pause for a second here and this is the last of the phases. So let's see, we're pretty much at time. Anybody have any quick thoughts in chat about that? Concern is that they say they don't know anyone. Yeah. Hey, so if they don't know anyone, that's fine. You've made it really clear. I'm going to send you an email in case you do. And if you don't know anybody in this particular category, is there this kind of a person you do know, right? So this kind of person could be an influencer. This kind of person could be a title match. This kind of a person could be somebody adjacent to the industry you're in, and just say, look, this is what I'm trying to do. So if you know anybody in this category, be happy to have a conversation with them. You know, not the best lead, but that's how you move in that direction. But really, like, I hate to say it like this, it's okay if that person we're talking to can't help us. Yep. Okay, so turning the corner, basically we want to be an opportunity magnet. And I would just ask you guys, where do you feel like you fit in this matrix here? Are you an A, a B, a C, or a D? Where do you think you fit right now? Yeah, this how do I go from being invisible to visible is really around getting clarity of where that visibility needs to be occurring and how do you get strategic about it. Great, thanks. Yeah. Okay, so we kind of touched on these, so I'm going to flash through this because of timing, but basically we don't want to do the normal job search approach. What we need to do is become way more focused on how do we get to clear positioning, how do we get our top 20 targeted organizations clear, right? Not broad ones. We don't need a broad list. We need a very focused list that we want to target. How do we activate around that? And then run a clear strategy. So people always ask, what is it that we do? It's a done with you program. Done with you means we actually work with you side by side, and it's not boilerplate. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox and playbooks, but they're not templates. We don't just give you a bunch of homework and say good luck. The coaching isn't generic. It's all built around your gaps and personalized, so we can help you get through that. I flashed this earlier in the process, and not to overwhelm you, this just goes to show when we talk about beads on the bracelet, now this makes a little bit more sense, right? We've got to thread the needle through multiple things, beads on a bracelet, to show up well in the marketplace, and then to show up well in the interview, and then to show up well when we get an offer, and then show up well when we start our first 90 days in the new role. So this is a really purpose-built, highly effective approach to how do we get this clear. This is how we are able to reduce these long transition periods into a much shorter, more specific, compelling timeline, right? 3, 4, 5 months, something like that. Okay. So next steps, if you haven't taken our assessment, that's what you would do next. That assessment will take you about 20 minutes. It is designed to be diagnostic, and it does include a robust 20-page personalized report. So it actually takes the content that you share with us in terms of the diagnostic content, and it helps give you some remediation factors and helps you really kind of like know where to start. So that's the first step. And if you've already done that, your next step would be to do a discovery call. And so that would be, yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, the assessment is helpful. And then in that discovery call, Brandy and Trevor will be able to really figure out like, what's your current status, what's your situation, what are you up against, and then move that into action. And if you haven't had enough of me, reach me at Justin at Onyx Unlocks. So that gets us to the end, guys.
If you have, any further questions, we can answer them right here, or you can reach out to any one of us, Justin at onyxunlocks.com, brandy.shade at onyxunlocks.com, or trevor.shade at onyxunlocks.com. And we can answer your questions. We're happy to do, a 30-minute consultation with you if you have specific questions around something. And we have a lot of these really great webinars posted on YouTube under Executive Pivots. So if you would like to go out to YouTube and see more of these wonderful videos, they're out there for you, public, as well as if you follow Executive Pivots on LinkedIn, we also post jobs out there every day that we're finding. So if there's anything else we can do to help, you just let us know. Trevor, anything from your perspective? That's all I got.
Oh, I thought it was a great session too. Really appreciate you sharing everything, Justin, and stepping through the high level view as well as actual tactical, take it away from it today and do something, make an actual change in the next 24 hours, information and methods. Love it. Appreciate it.
Glad to help.
Okay, we'll let you all go for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.